Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, July 6th, 2021, and today I'm going to be talking about CNN's top 10 most likely states to flip in the 2022 Senate elections. Now, CNN has released these rankings since the month of March, where they have pretty much just been characterizing the states that they believe are the most likely to flip in ascending order, from most likely to least likely. Now, they've boiled it down to pretty much just 10 Senate races, even though over 30 are up in 2022, mainly because many of these states are considered safe. Now, you can see on my channel, I've released projections every single month as well. I don't exactly go into the 10 most likely, but I do try to characterize all of the states that I do think will be competitive. And if you're looking at the map, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 states, actually 11. I think I miscounted there. That's 5, and that's 5, and that's 11. 11 states that aren't considered to be safe by each political party, which means that they're decided by a likely margin, a lean margin, or a tilt margin. You can find out what those mean in the description box down below just by expanding more. But essentially, we are working within the same realm of possibility for pickups for both parties as the general news media is. I mean, the news media starts to release projections around a year out to the election where they can sort of characterize the state of the race. Now, in the 2020 election, a lot more companies actually waited a little bit further down the line. I remember FiveThirtyEight didn't release their election forecast until way later than everybody else, even after many media sources had published their ratings for each state and changed them over time. And the Cook Political Report and Sabato's Crystal Ball have been updating presidential election characterizations since months ago, even though 2024 is in 3.5 years. But looking at these 10 Senate seats rankings, we're going to be looking at them and going through them and talking about which states I completely understand and agree with, and then other states where I'm sort of questioning not necessarily the judgment, because this is all political punditry and pretty much it is very arbitrary in terms of how you characterize each state. But generally, you do try to see some consensus. And after looking through this list, and I promise you I've looked at it before I actually started this video, I've agreed with most of these choices. But I don't exactly agree with some of the rankings. There are some cases where I would go back and look at an older ranking from March, April, and May. I'm actually going to show you March because that was the first time they released it, where I might agree more with the previous characterization as it is applicable to today. So let's go through the list and just talk about where they're coming from. So they start out by saying that there are 8 states that are projected to be competitive, yet keep in mind they're going to be showing us 10, which means that 2 of these races that they are going to be characterizing as most likely down to least likely to flip, but still having a possibility of doing so, are considered to be solid for a political party, either the Republicans or the Democrats. Just keep that in mind. There should be 8 on here that are projected to be competitive, but they're showing us 10. The first state that they show is the state of Pennsylvania, and this is the one that I probably agree with the most. I'm going to actually be live updating our map here. I'm going to quickly go ahead and characterize all of the states with how they voted in. It's weird that it's letting me move around the map. I don't think it should be. That where each incumbent party has control currently, so we're just going to be characterizing all of those states. I believe I made a mistake in the state of Georgia. So used to doing that just by habit. Interesting to see what's happening there in the Senate election, which of course will be covered in this video in terms of the states that are least likely and most likely to flip. But again, when I say that again, it's ascending order, which means that these 10 in total by CNN standard are the most likely out of the total number of races to actually end up flipping. But the first state is Pennsylvania, and I do agree with that. I think Pennsylvania probably does rank my number 1 in terms of most likely to flip. If I'm looking at the margins though, what I expect in Pennsylvania is the same that I expect in Wisconsin, but I don't think Wisconsin is equally as likely to flip. Right now in Pennsylvania, there are extenuating circumstances that put Republicans in a difficult predicament. Right now, they could either be running against Conor Lamb, who has yet to announce a Senate bid, or John Fetterman, the lieutenant governor of the state. Regardless, they are going to be facing off against a strong Democratic opponent. And the thing about Pennsylvania is that they don't have an incumbent. Pat Toomey is retiring and has actually been very outspoken against President Trump following the 2020 election. He was a critic before he was elected, but then ended up following through and backing him the same way Lindsey Graham did a 180 once Donald Trump was elected. But after the insurrection, after the claims of election fraud, Pat Toomey voted to convict President Trump and has continuously been against him. I think that's something that really is kept in mind, as many Trump voters here may not necessarily be as inspired to back a Republican like Toomey even though he clearly was electable in 2010 and 2016. So, Pat Toomey being ranked number 1 with this open race, I agree. Looking at Georgia, this is a state where Raphael Warnock just recently won an election in the 2020 election. Surprisingly enough, if you're looking at the race that was actually held for a special election, that was not the one held in 2016. So I know it's, this is the one that was held in 2016. The other race that was held, which was the regular election race, was John Ossoff's race. So he's not up because that was an actual regularly scheduled race. This one only occurred in 2020 because Johnny Isakson decided to retire. So they had to force an election. That wasn't a 6-year term. That's why you're seeing Raphael Warnock pop back up in 2022. But if he is elected, will last until 2028. But Isakson in 2016 won by over 10 points. He actually did so by winning a very significant portion of the black vote in the state of Georgia. He had a very strong relationship, I would say, with the minority groups across the state, not only black voters, but every minority group, and a very strong one amongst white voters, as any standard Republican would, which was enough to land him pretty solid victories across the state of Georgia. But with his retirement, it prompted a special election in which Kelly Loeffler was appointed to be that replacement nominee, and she ended up losing because she could not appeal the same way Johnny Isakson could. But looking at the results in 2020, I don't know if I necessarily agree with Georgia being ranked as right up there with the rest of the states being number 2. You know, I would probably move Georgia down a little bit, but I do agree that it will be competitive. And we'll talk about where we would actually move some of these states by the end of the video. I'm going to try to maybe just use this annotation tool. I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but for right now, I guess I'm just going to use the drawing tool where I'm going ahead and going to show you that I'm just going to arrow it downward just as an indication type of thing. For Wisconsin, I think makes sense. Wisconsin is a state where Ron Johnson has been a very big proponent of President Trump, a very big advocate for the election lies, and much of the discussion about the insurrection in terms of the defense for President Trump has actually been very critical of the vaccine, recently holding a conference where people were allowed to inform the regular constituents about the dangers of the vaccine, the harsh and long-term side effects. Essentially, Ron Johnson made this as an effort to go against what the public health and what the CDC really wants us to do in terms of getting vaccinated, sort of making people question whether or not they should. And that alone, I think, is something that will be closely tied into the more right-wing type of anti-COVID vax situation amongst the likes of maybe not as right-wing as Marjorie Taylor Greene, but amongst similar company. And for Ron Johnson to be in the number 3 position, I think it makes sense. But I would move him up against Raphael Warnock to just the number 2 position, where I think that it would be easier fit, because right now in the state of Georgia, I do expect Raphael Warnock to win. He isn't exactly facing off against super insane competition, at least in terms of electoral experience. Herschel Walker seems to be a recognizable name, very similar fashion to Donald Trump. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Only time will tell, but for right now, I do think Wisconsin is at more of a risk than Georgia is for the Democrats. And in terms of Wisconsin with Ron Johnson, he's yet to announce whether or not he's going to run. For Arizona, I'm kind of iffy about this one. Mark Kelly is popular. Plainly put, I don't think he should be ranked above the state of North Carolina. I would move him down. The thing about Arizona is that this is a state that actually has shown us in 2018 in a very similar fashion to Georgia, except it actually voted for more Democrats than it did Republicans in 2018 and 2020, where the state was shifting fundamentally. In 2016, John McCain, who unfortunately passed away and thus prompted the special election in 2020 in which Mark Kelly won. That's also why he's up in 2022. Again, if elected in 2022, will serve until 2028. But John McCain won by over 10 points, very similarly to Johnny Isakson. I mean, popular incumbents who did well amongst minority groups enough to outperform their presidential counterparts. Donald Trump won by Arizona by 3.5%, won in Georgia by 5.1%. Isakson won by around 13-14, McCain similar. So what I see in Arizona is that this is a state which has had leftward trends for quite some time. 2016, 2018, 2020. I do expect Arizona to be a state that will be competitive, but I don't expect it to be number 4. I think Arizona certainly could be pushed down to number 5, and Mark Kelly will be vulnerable, but not exactly in a position where I would bet on him losing. For North Carolina, Richard Burr, the next state, I said I was going to move this one up. Richard Burr used to be a pretty big endorser of President Trump, someone who, yes, I would say had some reservations, as many Republican senators did, but for him to have actually voted to convict President Trump it was quite surprising. And the reason why I think he did it was possibly due to the fact that he is retiring, maybe because he's not exactly going to be in a position where he can be primaried or lose a general election. When you leave on your own terms, there's really nobody else you have to turn to in terms of overall support, in terms of the ability to win re-election. You're leaving and you're saying to the voters that I am choosing to leave on my own. You are not kicking me out. And in North Carolina, this state was actually pretty close in the 2020 presidential election. What I saw in North Carolina was that Donald Trump reduced his margin by more than half. He won here by 1.3%, and while it was a victory, and if 2022 does end up being a red wave year, sure, that victory could be expanded for the Republicans. But what I see in this state is an individual underperformance for Donald Trump. If you're looking at the state's minority population as well, just the right candidate to turn out black voters, for example, Sherry Beasley, possibly, could be enough to overturn the state. Democrats nearly won the popular vote in the House of Representatives in North Carolina and would have won it had they ran a candidate in the 3rd District. The state of North Carolina, while largely inelastic, does have times where Democrats are able to win. And while 2022 will be difficult, and I didn't expect it based off of my current characterization, it's not at all out of question. So North Carolina, I would rank above Arizona and possibly even above the state of Georgia. You know, in this position that Georgia is in, yes, Raphael Warnock is vulnerable, but more vulnerable than an open race in North Carolina. I mean, Georgia and North Carolina were around a point different in terms of their overall margin of victory for their respective parties. The Senate elections, looking at them, I mean, yes, Richard Burr did much better in 2016 than Warnock did in 2021, but understand the circumstances of the state of Georgia. Recently a swing state, North Carolina has long been since 2008. So it's different. We'll talk about the rankings once we get to the end of the video, but I just wanted to point that out because I did think it was something that needed to be discussed, but I do agree. North Carolina is absolutely a swing state, and if you look at the top 5 here from March, when the first rankings were released by CNN, Pennsylvania remained number 1, Georgia remained number 2, Wisconsin remained number 3, but Arizona and North Carolina actually flipped. I think this list here was slightly more accurate than the one we're working with. But again, we still have to go through. New Hampshire makes sense. I really don't have any complaints about New Hampshire being ranked at number 6. I think that it certainly can change if Chris Sununu decides to run. It was exceptionally close in 2016, but am I surprised that it's, going to be a state that is expected to be a larger margin than some other states? No. Hillary Clinton won in New Hampshire by 0.2%. Joe Biden did by 7 points. There was a very big difference between Clinton's margin and Biden's margin, which means that the environment might be more friendly to Democrats in 2022 than it was in 2016. Hassan won by 0.1% against Kelly Ayotte, won her election in 2010. We can actually take a look if you would like to see in the state of New Hampshire, 60-37, which means she won by 23 points, ended up losing in 2016. So certainly, I would say Maggie Hassan was a strong electoral contender in 2016, and I think she will be in 2022. But we still have to see if Chris Sununu decides to run, has yet to announce, but he still has plenty of time. But for right now, I'd say I'm pretty comfortable with the way that New Hampshire is ranked currently. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be letting me. We'll go ahead and see if I can go ahead and draw on the page again. It doesn't seem to be letting me draw down here, but I'm going to go ahead and say we're neutral about the state of New Hampshire in terms of where it's ranked. Nevada as well. I would say Nevada really is a state where I think that it makes sense that it stands at this point. Nevada was decided by 2.4% in 2016. If you want to take a look, it was decided by 2.4% on the presidential level. Get this, in 2020, it was decided by 2.4% as well. It seems that that number seems to be resonating well with voters in the state of Nevada, and it's a state that does lean towards the Democrats. It's actually comparable to North Carolina, where occasionally it is a swing state, but typically speaking, it's close, but not, occasionally goes to Republicans, always is a swing state, but almost always also goes towards the Democrats. It's close, but is left-leaning. Florida, I don't agree with really being number 8. I think Florida should be ranked lower than the state of Ohio. I think it also should be ranked lower than, maybe even another state. Looking at Ohio and Florida, right now the fact that Florida is ranked higher doesn't really make sense much to me. Florida is a state where Marco Rubio has won a significant portion of the Hispanic vote in 2010 and 2016. If you look at his 2016 margin of victory, it was much higher than Donald Trump's. In fact, to a point where I wouldn't be surprised if Marco Rubio won Miami-Dade County in 2022. The thing about Rubio is that he has an individual appeal to the voters here where he has remained immensely popular. The only poll released in this race, while yes, a Republican internal, shows Marco Rubio ahead by 20 points statewide. Do I think he will win by 20 points? No. Do I think he could win by double digits? Absolutely. Rubio has had a 7.7% margin of victory in 2016 when the state of Florida was more pro-Democrat than it was in 2020. If the year ends up more favorable for Republicans in 2022, there's nothing stopping Rubio from winning by double digits. Looking at Miami-Dade County, Patrick Murphy, as a lackluster candidate who lost by 8 points statewide, did better than Joe Biden in Miami-Dade County. Did better than many other Democrats will likely do. Because of Donald Trump's shift in that state, because he's been able to move over and convert some of these Hispanic voters, yes, I think Democrats will rebound and expand their margin, but for the case of Rubio, or potentially Ron DeSantis, Miami-Dade County might actually vote for a Republican as it got close in 2020. There won't be some type of election where if it's a brand new Republican, I expect them to do as well as Donald Trump in Miami-Dade County. But for these long-lasting Republicans, these well-known incumbents, I do expect them to do well in this region, which could be enough to push this state down more. And looking at the state of Ohio, I mean, yes, this is a state that went to Trump by 8 points. Florida only went by 3%. But understand the circumstances of the elections. Florida does not have a retiring incumbent. Ohio does. And while Ohio was decided by 20 points, arguably this was a poorly ran campaign by Ted Strickland. And if you're looking at the state itself in off years, typically speaking, it gets close. Whether it's 2014 or 2018 or 2010 even, these elections end up becoming narrower. Some of these governor elections with popular Republicans, sure, do well. But when it's an open race, Ohio sort of reverts back to its 4.5 point victory for either party. And in this case, I think that's exactly what's going to happen. I expect Ohio to be decided by a closer margin than Florida, which is why I don't necessarily agree with it being ranked as number 9 versus Florida at number 8. And my final thing about the race and the map here is that Missouri is ranked as number 10. I don't know if I agree with that characterization. Missouri is a state where, yes, it was close in 2016, but largely at a part of Roy Blunt being unpopular and Jason Kander being exceptionally well known and received across the state. I mean, Jason Kander only won, 5-6 counties across the state, yet was able to win 46.4% of the vote. Missouri nearly had a 2 Democrat delegation despite Donald Trump winning the state in 2016 and 2020 by over 15 points. Jason Kander was an exceptionally strong candidate. Roy Blunt wasn't. But Roy Blunt is out, and though Eric Greitens, someone who is definitely, I would say, infamous in the state of Missouri, is seemingly going to do well in the Republican primary, potentially win it, potentially not, we will see. I still don't expect this state to be ranked above the state of Colorado in terms of its overall projection. Colorado is a state that is absent from this list, but was mentioned back in March. And while Michael Bennet will possibly win by double digits, I wouldn't exactly say that Missouri will be more competitive than Colorado. Now, certainly things can change as the nominating process does continue and as more information is released about these individual races. But to see Colorado not on the list but Missouri ranked does kind of strike me in a very different type of way because it is quite surprising to see. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and just characterize. I'm going to try to use this annotation tool just as a way to make it or make it easy for me to draw here. So we're going to go ahead and characterize the states. Let's go ahead and just say that maybe we can use the text. The first state that I would characterize as the most competitive is the state of Pennsylvania. I've lost the annotations that I had before, but we're going to go ahead and say, okay, I don't think this is going to work. Maybe we can go ahead and just draw it, but essentially I would say Pennsylvania makes sense as number 1. Then we probably move over into Wisconsin. I would say Georgia a little bit more than the state of Arizona, but also I forgot the state of North Carolina, which I meant to move above those 2. So these first 5 I really do want to shuffle around the order, but they are the 5 most competitive races. The rest, there's sort of a drop off where these races might be decided by, depending on the candidates, by potentially 4 points or higher. New Hampshire, I said I was indifferent about. Nevada makes sense. And then as we go down, like I said, I would move the state of Ohio above Florida. and then I would also probably include Colorado over Missouri. So I'm going to go ahead and release the rankings that I believe in the comment section down below. Compare them to the CNN one. I just wanted you guys to go through the step-by-step process as to how I reached that conclusion. But essentially, what we're looking at here in the 2022 Senate elections based off CNN's estimates are pretty much the standard set of swing states, but I would change the rankings around just a little bit so there's a little bit better of an understanding as to which states are truly more likely to flip than others. But then again, I'm not trying to argue with the media company. I think that this list was very informative, but I just disagree on slight rankings in terms of overall states themselves. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.